The notice trembled in my hands, the crisp paper a stark official white against the gloom of the study. Final demand. The words were clinical, brutal. 30 days. 30 days until the life Sarah and I had built became a line item in a bank's ledger, a property to be auctioned off to strangers. My gaze drifted from the threatening print to my phone, where a different kind of life was playing out in vivid color. There was Sarah, my wife, her face alight with a joy I hadn't seen directed at me in years. She was on a beach in Cabo, turquoise water sparkling behind her, her arms wrapped around another man's neck. Her lips were pressed against his. The caption was a single, giddy word: paradise. And someone named Jake had been tagged. A quick search of his profile confirmed everything my gut already knew. I saw my wife in his arms, in his posts, in a life I had apparently been funding without my knowledge. A sharp, coppery taste filled my mouth, and I realized I'd bitten down on the inside of my cheek, hard. Blood bloomed on my tongue, a physical punctuation to the silent scream clawing its way up my throat, my thumb pressed into the phone's screen, a focal point for the hurricane of rage and disbelief swirling inside me. The glass beneath my digits spider-webbed with fine cracks, a perfect, shattered starburst emanating from the pressure point. The image of Sarah and Jake, kissing, remained, fractured but infuriatingly clear. I wanted to hurl the device against the wall, to watch it explode into 1,000 pieces, to obliterate their smiling faces. But some cold, calculating part of my brain held me back. I couldn't afford to destroy evidence. I couldn't afford to destroy anything else. My chest burned with a hollow, acidic rage. It was the unique agony of betrayal that hits deeper than flesh, a wound that festers in the soul. This wasn't just about infidelity. It was about the calculated destruction of our shared world. She had taken the money meant to keep a roof over our heads, the money I earned, the future I planned, and spent it on cheap tequila and a sunset tryst with a man named Jake. Every late night I had worked, every weekend sacrificed for a promotion, every careful budget we had agreed upon, all of it had been liquidated to fund her escape. The memories of our life together curdled in my mind, turning into a slideshow of lies. Her talk of tight finances, her feigned stress over bills, her hand-wringing over the cost of groceries. It was all a performance. A meticulous, cruel deception while she was planning a romantic getaway with her lover, paid for with the bricks and mortar of our home. The rational part of my mind, the part not consumed by the fire in my gut, started doing the grim math. The bank's letter was dated 3 days ago. It had probably sat in the mailbox while I was on my work trip, waiting like a time bomb. They closed at 5 p.m. tomorrow. That gave me less than 24 hours to even attempt a conversation, to beg for an extension I knew they wouldn't grant without the full overdue amount. After that, the foreclosure process would be unstoppable. The house, our house, would go to public auction in 29 days. The timeline was a vice, squeezing the air from my lungs, each passing second a turn of the screw. The walls of the study, lined with books we'd collected and photos from a happier time, suddenly felt like the interior of a tomb. A new kind of clarity cut through the red haze of my anger. It was cold, sharp, and focused. Before she had a chance to sober up from her beachside bliss and realize her mistake, before she could scrub her social media clean and craft a new narrative of victimhood, I had to act. My thumb, now stained with a tiny speck of blood from my cheek, moved with methodical purpose. I swiped through her Instagram feed, through Jake's feed, capturing every photo. Sarah laughing with a margarita in her hand. Jake's arm slung possessively around her waist on a boat. A close-up of their intertwined hands, her wedding ring conspicuously absent. Screenshot, screenshot, screenshot. Each image was a nail for the coffin I was about to build. A digital record of her treachery. This wasn't just about saving my house anymore. This was about salvaging what was left of my life from the wreckage she had made. This was evidence. This was the beginning of what came next. The fury of the previous hour began to cool, solidifying into something harder and more useful: resolve. I spent the next 2 hours in a state of icy focus, dismantling the financial life Sarah and I had built together with a few keystrokes and a series of dispassionate phone calls. The first step was the joint savings account, the one we'd labeled Future Fund. It held just over $30,000, a cushion we'd painstakingly grown over 6 years. I logged into our online banking portal, the familiar interface now feeling like enemy territory. With a few clicks, I initiated a transfer, draining every last cent into a new, individual account I'd opened just minutes before. The confirmation screen glowed with a sense of profound finality. It was a surgical strike, clean and absolute. Next came the credit cards. I called the first company, navigating the automated menu with grim patience until I reached a human. "I need to report my wife's card as stolen," I said, the lie tasting like justice. The agent was sympathetic and efficient. The card was canceled. I repeated the process 3 more times, a methodical severing of her financial lifelines. The last act was almost comically petty, yet it brought a sharp, unexpected sting of satisfaction. I logged into our shared streaming services, Netflix, Hulu, Prime Video, and systematically changed every password. It was a small, digital victory, a reclaiming of territory in the most trivial of ways, but each password change felt like bolting a door shut against her. Each small act was a sip of freedom, washing away the bitter taste of helplessness. The call came less than an hour later, just as I was printing the last of the screenshots. Her face, contorted with rage, popped up on my phone screen via FaceTime. She was still in what looked like a hotel room, the sun-drenched balcony visible behind her. The irony was suffocating. I let it ring 3 times before answering, my own face a carefully composed mask of indifference. "Marcus!" she shrieked, forgoing any greeting. "My card was just declined at the gift shop. All of them were. What the hell did you do?" Her voice was a shrill, entitled squall, the voice of someone who has never been denied anything she truly wanted. There was no concern in her tone, no hint of worry about what might be wrong back home. Only pure, unadulterated fury that her vacation had been inconvenienced. She held up her phone to show me a banking notification, as if I were a misbehaving employee she needed to discipline. "I canceled them," I said, my voice unnervingly calm even to my own ears. The contrast between her screeching and my quiet statement was immense. It felt like holding a shield against a storm. Her face, tanned and beautiful, twisted into a mask of disbelief. She couldn't process it. In her world, I was the stable, predictable provider. I was the one who fixed things, who smoothed things over, who absorbed the costs. I was not the one who took things away. "You what? Why would you do that? I need that money, Marcus. Are you insane?" "Same thing you did to our mortgage payment," I replied, the words hanging in the air between us, heavy and lethal. I saw the flash of comprehension in her eyes, the flicker of fear that replaced the anger for just a second. She opened her mouth to unleash another torrent of curses, her voice rising in pitch and desperation, but she never got the chance. I ended the call, plunging her enraged face back into digital silence. The quiet that followed was the most peaceful sound I had heard all day. The small victories were intoxicating, but they were not the war. Adrenaline still coursed through me, but now it was channeled, directed. The foreclosure attorney's office opened in 6 hours. Dawn was a pale promise on the horizon, And I knew I couldn't walk into that meeting armed with just screenshots and a story of betrayal. I needed proof. I needed numbers, statements, and a clear timeline of her financial deceit. Sarah was meticulously organized when it suited her, but she was also arrogant. I knew she kept records, confident that I would never have a reason to look for them. Her files were on her laptop, the sleek silver device sitting on her vanity table, a place I rarely went. I walked into our bedroom, the scent of her perfume still lingering in the air, a ghostly reminder of the woman I thought I knew. I picked up the laptop, my hands steady. The login screen glowed, asking for a password. I tried the obvious first. Our anniversary, my birthday, the dog's name. Access denied. Each failed attempt was a small, mocking rejection. I felt a surge of frustration, the cold resolve momentarily threatening to crack. Then, a thought, bitter and ugly, surfaced in my mind. It was a long shot, a truly pathetic possibility, but I had to try. I typed in Jake's birthday. I only knew it because she had made a big deal about a friend's 40th a few months back, a party I'd been too busy with work to attend. My fingers hovered over the enter key, a part of me dreading the confirmation, dreading this final, intimate proof of her long-running deception. I pressed the key. The screen unlocked. A wave of nausea and vindication washed over me in equal measure. Some secrets really are just too pathetic to change. For the next 4 hours, I owned her digital world. I found everything. Bank statements showing massive cash withdrawals just before her trip with girlfriends. Credit card bills filled with charges for flights to Cabo, couples massages, and dinners for two at resorts I'd never heard of. I found emails between her and Jake, nauseatingly sweet exchanges planning their romantic getaway, discussing how to hide the expense. She hadn't just spent the mortgage money. She had been systematically siphoning funds for months, creating a secret slush fund for her affair. I downloaded it all, saved it to a thumb drive, and created a meticulous, undeniable timeline of her betrayal, ready for the attorney. The sun was rising, and for the first time in 24 hours, I felt like I had a fighting chance. The thumb drive containing all the evidence felt heavy in my pocket, a small, dense weight of truth. I had managed a few hours of restless, dream-haunted sleep on the couch before the sun was fully up. My meeting with the foreclosure attorney was at 9, and as I nursed a cup of black coffee, my phone rang again. It wasn't Sarah. The caller ID showed her mother's name, and I felt a wave of profound exhaustion wash over me. I knew exactly what this was, the enlistment of the cavalry. I let it ring until the last possible moment before answering, steeling myself for the performance I was about to witness. "Marcus, dear," she began, her voice a carefully calibrated instrument of gentle concern. I could practically see her in her pristine, all-white kitchen, the one she proudly displayed in family photos, a world away from the emotional and financial squalor her daughter had created. "Sarah called me. She's terribly upset. She said some very confusing things about the bank accounts. I'm sure there's just been a dreadful misunderstanding." Before I could even formulate a response, her mother's face on the screen shifted. "Hold on, honey. She wants to talk to you." And just like that, Sarah's tear-streaked face filled my screen, a masterpiece of calculated misery. Her eyes were puffy and red, her mascara artfully smudged, a damsel in digital distress. It was a role she had perfected over the years, the fragile victim of circumstances beyond her control. Her mother's face remained visible in a smaller window, a concerned spectator in this little drama she had orchestrated. "Marcus," Sarah sobbed, her voice catching theatrically. "How could you? You just left me stranded here with no money. My cards are useless. You cleaned out our accounts like some common thief." The accusation was so audacious, so completely divorced from reality that for a moment I was speechless. She was painting me as the villain to the one person whose opinion she valued above all others, her mother, the family's matriarch and moral arbiter. I could feel the trap closing. She wasn't just trying to get her money back. She was retroactively justifying her affair, building a narrative where I was the monster who drove her away. I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the silence stretch. I refused to be provoked. I refused to meet her manufactured hysteria with anger. When I finally spoke, my voice was low and even. "There seems to be some confusion, you're right," I said, looking directly at her mother's image on the screen, deliberately excluding Sarah from my gaze. "Sarah isn't stranded. She has a return ticket for a flight that lands tonight, which I know because the confirmation email was on her laptop. The issue isn't that she has no money. The issue is that she spent our money, $15,000 of it to be precise, on a vacation for another man." I paused, letting the words land. "Honey," I said, my voice softening into a mimicry of her mother's fake concern, "maybe you shouldn't have spent $15,000 on another man's vacation." Sarah's sobs hitched. Her mother's placid expression froze, the plastic sympathy cracking around the edges. I had bypassed the melodrama and gone straight for the facts, delivering them not to the accused, but to the judge she had brought into the conversation. It's not what it looks like," Sarah stammered, her performance faltering. The victim mask was slipping, revealing the petulant, selfish woman beneath. "That was different," she insisted, her voice gaining a defensive edge. "Jake needed to get away. He's been under so much stress with his ex-wife drama and his business, and I was just trying to help him." The excuse was so breathtakingly narcissistic, it was almost impressive. She had reframed the embezzlement of our mortgage payment as an act of charity, a noble sacrifice she had made for a man in need. She saw nothing wrong, no connection between her lavish generosity toward her lover and the foreclosure notice sitting on my desk. In her mind, the two existed in separate universes, governed by different rules. She was helping a friend in need. I was just being cruel and controlling about money. A heavy silence descended on the three-way call. I waited. I knew this was the critical moment. Sarah's entire strategy hinged on her mother's support, on their united front against me. I watched her mother's face, saw the flicker of emotions playing across her features. Confusion, then dawning comprehension, and finally, a weary, disappointed resignation. She looked at her weeping daughter. Then her gaze shifted to meet mine through the screen. When she spoke, her voice had lost all its earlier warmth. It was flat, brittle. "And Marcus needed to keep your house," she said, the statement landing with the force of a gavel. "But here we are." It wasn't an expression of support for me. Not really. It was an abandonment of Sarah. It was the pragmatic verdict of a woman who understood finance, appearances, and consequences. In that single sentence, she had dismantled Sarah's entire defense. The $15,000 wasn't just a number. It was the down payment on the very house her mother had so proudly toured at our housewarming party. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't tense. It was empty. It was the sound of a lifeline being cut. Sarah stared at her mother, her mouth slightly agape, the tears forgotten. She had expected a champion, an ally who would help her berate me into submission. Instead, her mother had calmly and publicly handed her the shovel to dig her own grave. The taste of victory was complex, not sweet, but deeply satisfying, like setting a dislocated bone back into place. It was the grim satisfaction of truth prevailing over a carefully constructed web of lies. I had broken their alliance. After another long, awkward moment, her mother offered a clipped, "I have to go," and her window on the screen vanished. Sarah looked at me, her eyes now filled not with tears, but with a cold, hard fury I had never seen before. It was the look of a cornered animal. Without another word, she ended the call. I leaned back, the coffee cup warm in my hands. The first skirmish was over, but the notification on my phone was a stark reminder. Her flight was scheduled to land at 10 p.m. The real war starts tomorrow. The lawyer's office was an oasis of calm, mahogany, and leather, a world away from the chaos of my life. Her name was Elena, and she'd been recommended by a colleague as someone who was allergic to losing. She had sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to miss nothing, and a handshake that was firm and decisive. I had walked in feeling like a victim, clutching my thumb drive of evidence like a holy relic. I expected a lengthy, sympathetic interview. Instead, I got a masterclass in tactical warfare. I laid out the story, my voice flat and emotionless as I recounted the mortgage notice, the Instagram post, and the pathetic discovery of the laptop password. I handed her the drive. She plugged it into her computer, and for 10 minutes, the only sound in the room was the quiet clicking of her mouse as she navigated the labyrinth of my wife's deceit. She didn't offer platitudes or condolences. She just absorbed the information, her expression unreadable. Finally, she leaned back in her high-backed leather chair, and a slow, thin smile spread across her lips. It was not a warm smile. It was a shark's smile, the kind that promised a swift and bloody end for her prey. "This is excellent work, Marcus," she said, her voice a low purr of professional appreciation. "The screenshots, the timeline, the emails, it's a beautifully clear narrative of asset dissipation. It's almost poetic." She turned the monitor toward me, showing a spreadsheet she had already begun to populate. "You found the $15,000 for the Cabo trip. That's the emotional core, the slam dunk for any judge. But you've been thinking too small." She clicked on a different file, a preliminary asset search she had run that morning. "I had a hunch. Women like Sarah, the ones who feel entitled to a certain lifestyle, rarely commit fraud just once. It becomes a habit." The screen filled with bank records I had never seen before, from an account at a different credit union, opened 18 months ago in her name only. "She's been transferring money for months," Elena explained, her finger tracing a series of regular, almost scheduled withdrawals from our joint checking account. $500 here, $1,000 there, small enough to fly under the radar, to be explained away as shopping sprees or spa days if I ever asked. But they weren't random. They all went to this secret account. "She's been building a nest egg," Elena continued. "Over $22,000 on top of the vacation funds. She wasn't just planning a trip, Marcus. She was planning an exit." The air left my lungs. The Cabo trip was a spontaneous, selfish betrayal. This was different. This was a long, calculated campaign of theft against our marriage, against me. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The shark's smile returned. "We don't just file for divorce. We file for divorce with an emergency petition. We claim flagrant dissipation of marital assets and adultery. We'll use your evidence to petition the judge for an immediate ex parte order, granting you temporary exclusive possession of the marital home. We argue that she has, by her own actions, abandoned the property and its financial responsibilities." She was already typing, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she dictated notes to herself. "We will demand full repayment of every cent she funneled into this secret account and every dollar she spent on Mr. Jake. We will make it financially catastrophic for her to have ever met him." The speed and precision of her strategy were dizzying. She slid the divorce papers, freshly printed, across the vast expanse of her mahogany desk. "Sign here, here, and here. A process server will greet your wife at the airport tonight. The hearing for the emergency order is set for tomorrow at 10 a.m. In the 12 hours that followed, I existed in a state of suspended animation. The house was cavernously silent. Every creak and groan of the old structure a reminder of the life that had been hollowed out from within its walls. I walked through the rooms, looking at the photos of a smiling couple I no longer recognized. I packed a small bag for Sarah with some clothes and toiletries, leaving it by the front door like an offering for a ghost. There was no anger left, just a cold, grim sense of purpose. I had the truth, I had the evidence, and I had Elena. I pictured the scene in court tomorrow. Sarah, fresh off her flight, blindsided by the server and now standing before a judge. I imagined her face, that perfect mask of performative fragility, crumbling as Elena laid out the cold, hard facts of her secret bank account, her long-term affair, her systematic plundering of our future. I saw her lies evaporating under the harsh fluorescent lights of the courtroom. I saw victory. For the first time since I'd seen that Instagram photo, I felt like I was in control. The universe had been thrown off its axis, and tomorrow I would be the one to set it right. The next morning, I stood in the hallway of the family courthouse, a place that smelled of stale coffee and quiet desperation. Elena was beside me, a vision of tailored confidence in a dark gray suit, her leather briefcase clicking authoritatively as she walked. She gave me a brief, reassuring nod. "Ready?" she asked. "Let's go." We entered the courtroom. It was smaller than I'd imagined, paneled in cheap wood veneer that had seen better days. The air was thick with tension. I took my seat at the plaintiff's table, my back straight, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. I scanned the entrance, waiting for Sarah to appear. I expected her to be alone, perhaps with her mother in tow, looking haggard and defeated. I braced myself for the inevitable tears and accusations. The courtroom doors opened, and my breath caught in my throat. It wasn't the fragile victim I had married who walked in. It was a different woman entirely. Her hair was perfectly styled, her makeup immaculate. She wore a sharp, professional-looking dress, armor of a different kind. And she wasn't alone. Walking beside her, his hand placed possessively on the small of her back, was Jake. He was tan, handsome in a bland, generic way, and he radiated an aura of smug arrogance. He surveyed the courtroom as if he owned it, his eyes finally landing on me with a look of open contempt. My entire body went rigid. The sheer audacity of it was like a physical blow. He wasn't just a secret lover anymore. He was a statement. He was her chosen partner, and she was presenting him to the world, to the court, to me, without an ounce of shame. And they weren't alone. Trailing them was a man in an expensive suit, carrying a briefcase that looked identical to Elena's. My heart plummeted. Sarah wasn't just here with her lover. She had a lawyer of her own. The carefully constructed scenario in my head, the one where she crumbled under the weight of my evidence, shattered into a million pieces. Elena's eyes narrowed ever so slightly, the only sign that our airtight plan had just sprung a massive, unexpected leak. Sarah took her seat at the defendant's table, met my gaze across the small room, and offered a small, triumphant smile. The war wasn't over. It had just been declared. The image of Sarah's triumphant smirk was burned into my memory, a declaration of war I had foolishly failed to anticipate. We left the courthouse not with a victory, but with a continuance. The preliminary hearing was rescheduled for 3 days later. A brief ceasefire granted by the judge to allow both sides to prepare. Sarah's lawyer had been slick and aggressive, immediately painting me as a volatile and controlling husband, claiming my financial actions were proof of economic abuse. It was a complete inversion of the truth, but in the sterile environment of the court, it sounded plausible. "She's not just defending," Elena said as we sat in her office moments later, the shark's smile replaced by a look of focused intensity. "She's attacking. Bringing him to court was a power play. It tells the judge she has nothing to hide. It makes the affair seem like a legitimate relationship that I'm unfairly maligning." She tapped a pen on her legal pad. "When they make the lover a combatant, we have to treat him like one. We need to know everything about Mr. Jake." That afternoon, she hired a private investigator, a discreet man with a background in forensic accounting and a reputation for unearthing secrets people thought were buried forever. The results came back in less than 48 hours, and they were more potent than I could have imagined. Jake was indeed embroiled in ex-wife drama, but it wasn't with an ex. He was very much married. The PI's report was a damning portrait of a serial philanderer. It included hushed interviews with former colleagues and jilted lovers who spoke of his charm and his predatory nature. He sought out women who could benefit him, either financially or professionally, and Sarah, with access to our joint accounts, was a perfect target. The PI's file contained photos not just of him and Sarah in Cabo, but of him with 2 other women over the past 3 years. Sarah wasn't special. She was just the latest chapter in his sordid history. But the most critical piece of information was his wife's name and place of work. She was a partner at a high-profile urban planning firm in the city. Armed with this knowledge and a manila envelope of damning photographs, I took a deep breath and prepared to make a move that would take this war to a whole new level. The wife's office was on the 34th floor of a downtown skyscraper, a world of glass and steel that hummed with quiet power. Her assistant looked at me with polite suspicion when I said I had personal information for her regarding her husband. After a tense 5-minute wait, I was ushered into a corner office with a panoramic view of the city. She was standing by the window, her back to me, a tall, impeccably dressed woman who commanded the room even in silhouette. She turned, and I found myself looking at a face that was strikingly beautiful, but etched with a weariness that no amount of professional poise could hide. "You have 5 minutes?" she said, her voice cool and steady. I didn't waste any of them. I walked to her large, uncluttered desk and laid the manila envelope on its surface. I opened the clasp and slid out the top photograph, the one of Sarah kissing Jake on the beach in Cabo. I said nothing. I let the image speak for itself. She picked it up, her expression unreadable. Her hand was perfectly steady as she cycled through the next few pictures. Sarah and Jake on the boat, laughing, the 2 of them walking hand in hand. There was no gasp, no outburst, just a profound, chilling stillness. "How long have you known about my husband and your wife?" she asked finally, her eyes still fixed on the glossy photograph of their beachside embrace. Her composure was unnerving. She wasn't reacting like a victim. She was processing data, analyzing a threat. This was a woman accustomed to dealing with high-stakes negotiations, and it was clear she viewed this as just another one. "I found out 3 days ago," I answered, my voice quiet but firm. "My wife used our joint funds, money meant for our mortgage, to pay for their romantic vacation while I was away on business." I watched for a reaction, and for the first time, I saw one. A flicker of something. Not surprise, but a dark sort of confirmation passed through her eyes. She told me he was having a hard time, that he needed to get away. This was the opening. This was the bridge between our 2 separate betrayals. "Long enough to know he's been funding their romance with both our money," I said, leaning forward slightly. "Your money, my money. It appears your husband has a habit of financing his affairs with other people's assets. My wife stole from our future to give him a present. I'm just beginning to wonder how many of his expenses you've been covering under the assumption they were for his business." I let that sink in. I was no longer just the grieving husband. I was a fellow victim of a financial crime, a potential ally in a fight she may have been waging silently for years. She put the photos down, arranging them into a neat single stack, as if tidying up a messy file. Her gaze was direct, her intelligence formidable. "What do you want from me?" she asked. The question was sharp, devoid of sentiment. She knew this wasn't a social call. "Justice," I said simply. "And maybe a witness when this all goes to court. My wife's lawyer is trying to paint me as the villain. Her affair is being positioned as a legitimate relationship that I drove her to. A sworn testimony from you, detailing your husband's history and his financial arrangements, would change that narrative instantly. It would expose them both for what they are." She stared at me, her mind clearly working, calculating angles and outcomes. I had come here hoping for an emotional ally, but I was realizing I might have found something far better. A strategic one. She looked from the photos to my face, and a wry, humorless smile touched her lips. "His business?" she said almost to herself. "That's what he calls it." She looked out the window at the sprawling city below. "Jake's construction business depends on city contracts," she said, her voice taking on a new, harder edge. "Big, lucrative public works projects. Contracts that my firm often plays a significant role in awarding. He thinks his charm keeps the work flowing. He's a fool. He doesn't seem to understand that I am the only reason his company hasn't folded a dozen times over." The reveal hit me with the force of a physical blow. This was the leverage. This was the ex-wife drama Sarah had so cavalierly mentioned. It wasn't about emotion. It was about power. Jake wasn't just cheating on his wife. He was cheating on his benefactor, the very person who held his professional life in her hands. She turned back to me, her eyes now glinting with a cold, clear purpose. She picked up the stack of photos. "You'll have your witness, Mr. Collins," she said, "and I believe I'll be joining you at the courthouse. It's time to renegotiate some contracts." As I walked out of her office and into the elevator, I felt the world shift beneath my feet. A bell tower somewhere in the city began to chime. I glanced at my watch. It was noon. Our preliminary hearing, the one Sarah and Jake were walking into so arrogantly, was in 3 hours. And I was no longer coming armed with just a story of a broken heart. I was coming with a weapon of mass destruction. The 3 days of ceasefire had been a unique form of torture, a marathon of anxiety and strategic planning. Returning to the courtroom felt like stepping into a gladiatorial arena. The air, which had been tense before, was now electric with malice. Sarah and Jake sat at their table, a united front of defiance. Sarah whispered in her lawyer's ear, while Jake leaned back in his chair, affecting an air of bored superiority. He caught my eye and gave a slight, dismissive shake of his head, a gesture of pity that was meant to unnerve me. It failed. I looked past him, to the back of the courtroom, where a woman with a will of iron sat watching, a silent harbinger of the storm to come. Elena, beside me, was a picture of calm lethality. She gave my arm a slight squeeze. "Deep breaths. Let them build their house of cards. We just have to pull one string to make it all fall." Sarah's lawyer, a man with a booming voice and an overly confident swagger, began his assault. He painted a masterful picture of a marriage in its death throes, not because of infidelity, but because of my alleged tyranny. "Your Honor," he thundered, pacing before the judge, "we have here a classic case of financial coercion and emotional abandonment. Mr. Collins, upon discovering a minor marital disagreement, acted not with reason, but with punitive rage. He seized all marital assets, canceled his wife's credit cards, and effectively left her stranded and destitute, a refugee from her own home. He claims she abandoned her financial responsibilities, but it was his aggressive, unilateral action that precipitated this crisis. Elena remained still, letting him exhaust his narrative. When it was her turn, she didn't pace or thunder. She walked calmly to the plaintiff's table, picked up a thick binder, and approached the judge. "Your Honor," she said, her voice crisp and clear, "the evidence will show that the minor marital disagreement Mr. Collins discovered was his wife spending over $15,000 of their mortgage money on a luxury vacation to Cabo with her lover, Mr. Jake here." She placed the binder on the judge's bench. "And it will show that the punitive rage was, in fact, a desperate act of financial self-preservation, taken only after Mr. Collins discovered his wife had been systematically draining their marital assets for over 18 months. The cornerstone of their defense was Sarah's testimony. She took the stand, swore the oath with a hand that didn't tremble, and began to weave her fiction. She was soft-spoken, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. She spoke of loneliness, of a husband who was always working, of feeling emotionally neglected. It was a compelling performance. Her lawyer guided her gently. "And when you discovered Mr. Collins had emptied your joint accounts, how did you feel?" he asked sympathetically. "I was terrified," she whispered, dabbing a tissue at her dry eyes. "I was in a foreign country. He left me with nothing. I felt erased." Then came the lie, the one that would perjure her soul. Her lawyer asked, "Mrs. Collins, at any point did your husband withdraw funds without your permission prior to this incident?" She looked at me, a flicker of defiance in her eyes, before turning to the judge. "Your Honor, my husband withdrew funds without permission," she lied, her voice gaining strength. "He controlled everything. I had no idea he was moving money around until I was cut off completely." She was twisting my single act of self-defense into a long-running pattern of abuse, painting me as the secretive, controlling one. Elena's cross-examination was a masterpiece of surgical destruction. She approached the stand with a calm, almost gentle demeanor. "Mrs. Collins, you testified that your husband controlled the finances, is that correct?" "Yes," Sarah said firmly. "And that his withdrawal of funds was a shock to you?" "A complete shock." Elena nodded, then opened her binder. "Then perhaps you can explain these transfers." She placed a bank statement from Sarah's secret account in front of her. "This is an account at Northwood Credit Union, in your name only, correct?" Sarah's face paled slightly. I may have an account there." "You do," Elena confirmed. "And can you explain this series of transfers totaling over $22,000 from your joint account to this personal one over the last 18 months? Were these also done without your permission?" Sarah stammered. "Those were for personal expenses, household things." "I see," Elena said, her voice still even. "And was the $15,000 expenditure for flights, hotels, and entertainment in Cabo also a household thing?" Sarah's lawyer shot to his feet. "Objection! My client was on a trip. Who she was with is not relevant to the financial dispute." "Alleged lover," he spat out, looking at the judge. "We have no proof of adultery, only speculation designed to assassinate my client's character." The judge, a stern-faced woman who had been watching the exchange with growing impatience, looked at Elena. "Counselor, he has a point. Can you connect this trip to the dissipation of assets in a more direct way?" Elena smiled that shark's smile. "Actually, we can, Your Honor. The defense would argue that Mrs. Collins was simply helping a friend in need, Mr. Jake, who was suffering from ex-wife drama. We believe it's important to clarify the nature of that relationship and Mr. Jake's financial situation. With the court's permission, the plaintiff calls Ann Preston to the stand. The name dropped into the courtroom like a stone. Sarah's head whipped around, her eyes wide with panic. Jake, who had been lounging with such arrogance, sat bolt upright, his face a mask of pure horror. He stared at the back of the room, at his wife, who now rose gracefully and walked toward the witness stand. The swagger was gone. He looked like a man watching his own executioner approach. Ann Preston's testimony was not emotional. It was precise, factual, and utterly devastating. She confirmed she was Jake's wife. She confirmed he had a history of infidelity. And then, Elena had her produce her own financial records. "Mrs. Preston," Elena asked, "can you describe the nature of your husband's construction business?" "It's a company I funded as a silent partner," Ann said, her voice resonating with authority. "And its primary source of revenue?" "City contracts," Ann stated, "which are awarded based on proposals reviewed and often approved by my urban planning firm." The implication hung heavy in the air. Jake was not a self-made man. He was a dependent. "So, when your husband claimed to be under financial stress due to ex-wife drama, would that have been an accurate statement?" "No," Ann said, looking at Jake for the first time, her eyes filled with cold contempt. "He has no ex-wife, and his finances are entirely managed through my family's trust. He has an allowance. Any financial stress he was experiencing would be because he had overspent it." The room was silent. Sarah's entire defense, that she was helping a friend in need, had been obliterated. She wasn't a benefactor. She was just the latest fool to be duped by a kept man. The judge had heard enough. She held up a hand, silencing any potential objections. She looked down at the mountain of evidence, then at Sarah. Her voice was cold. "I have reviewed the evidence presented by both parties." She fixed her gaze on Sarah. "It appears Mrs. Collins has been systematically draining marital assets for months, culminating in a significant expenditure on a trip with a man who was, himself, financially deceiving her. Her testimony here today has been, to put it mildly, inconsistent with the documented facts." The judge's gaze shifted to me. "Mr. Collins's actions, while drastic, appear to be a direct and understandable reaction to this discovery." Sarah's face went white as the judge's words landed like hammer blows. The color drained from her cheeks, her mask of composure shattering completely, revealing the terrified, cornered person beneath. "Therefore," the judge declared, her voice ringing with finality, "the court grants the emergency petition. Mr. Collins is awarded temporary exclusive use and possession of the marital home. Furthermore, Mrs. Collins is ordered to repay the $15,000 taken for the vacation and the $22,000 transferred to her personal account, pending a full discovery of assets in the divorce proceedings." It was a total victory. Sarah just stared, slack-jawed, as her world collapsed in on her. Jake didn't even wait for the judge to finish. He shot up from his chair and stormed toward the exit, his face purple with rage. But his humiliation was not yet complete. As he shoved the courtroom doors open, he was met in the hallway by his wife and a man holding a sheaf of papers. In the echoing silence of the hall, I heard Ann's voice, clear and cold. "You've been served, Jake." He froze, looked down at the divorce papers in his hand, and then back at the smirking process server. His empire, built on lies and funded by the women he'd betrayed, had crumbled to dust in the space of 30 minutes. The final signing was an anticlimax, a sterile, bloodless affair conducted in the quiet of Elena's conference room. The fury of the courtroom had long since dissipated, replaced by the tedious finality of paperwork. Sarah was there with her new, less expensive lawyer, a man who looked as weary as she did. She had lost weight, and the defiant arrogance she had worn like armor was gone, leaving behind something brittle and hollow. She moved with a strange, joyless lethargy, her signature on the documents a weak, spidery script. She avoided my gaze throughout the entire process, focusing on the papers as if they held the secrets to a life she might have had. As she signed the last page, the one that officially dissolved our marriage and finalized the repayment schedule she would be saddled with for years, she finally looked at me. Her eyes were dull, the fire in them extinguished. She pushed the document across the table, and as I reached for it, she leaned forward, her voice a low, venomous whisper, a final, desperate attempt to land a blow. "You'll never be happy without me," she hissed, the words laced with the bitter certainty of someone who cannot imagine a world that does not revolve around them. I looked at her, at the wreckage of the woman I once loved, and felt nothing. No anger, no pain, only a profound and distant pity. I didn't say a word. I just signed my name, and with that, our history came to a close. 6 months later, the house was filled with the scent of sawdust and fresh paint. I was in the kitchen, covered in a fine layer of dust, prying old, dated cabinets from the wall with a crowbar. Each screech of protesting nails felt like an exorcism, a physical removal of the last vestiges of a life built on lies. The room was a chaotic mess of tools, exposed drywall, and potential. It was hard, satisfying work. I paused, wiping sweat from my brow with the back of my arm, and took in the space. The wall where our wedding photo used to hang was now stripped bare, ready for a new window that would look out onto the backyard. I was renovating my kitchen. The correction came easily now, a simple statement of fact. The doorbell rang, pulling me from my work. I opened it to find Elena standing on the porch, holding a bottle of wine and smiling. It was a smile that had, over the last few months of follow-up calls and legal loose ends, lost its professional, shark-like edge and become something genuinely warm. "I was in the neighborhood and thought you might need a hydration break," she said, holding up the bottle of red. "Or is it too early to celebrate the death of a truly hideous backsplash?" I laughed, a real easy laugh that echoed in the spacious hallway. "Never. Come on in, mind the dust." She stepped inside, her presence a welcome intrusion on my solitary work. We sat on the back deck, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the yard, sipping wine from coffee mugs because all my glasses were packed away. "So, how does it feel?" she asked, gesturing back toward the chaotic kitchen. "Good," I said, and the simplicity of the word felt true. "It feels good to be building something again." We talked for a while, the conversation drifting easily from renovation plans to work to the lives we were leading. I learned that Jake's construction business, built on the scaffolding of his wife's influence and my stolen savings, had collapsed spectacularly within a month of the court date. His name was mud in the industry, and the last she'd heard, he was facing lawsuits from suppliers he could no longer pay. And Sarah? Her fate was a quieter, more tragic kind of collapse. The court-ordered repayment plan was aggressive. She had sold her car and moved into a tiny studio apartment across town. I'd heard from a mutual acquaintance that she was waiting tables at a chain restaurant. The forced smile and relentless cheer, a far cry from the effortless charm she used to deploy so effectively. Her mother, after the public humiliation, had reportedly kept her distance, offering financial support only in the form of a monthly check that barely covered her rent. Sarah had tried to inflict a curse on me, but it had boomeranged, trapping her in a lonely, joyless life of her own making. The house felt bigger now, not because it was empty, but because it was filled with possibility instead of secrets. Every stripped wire and exposed beam was a chance to create something new, something honest. I realized then that the best revenge was never about watching them fail. Sometimes the best revenge is simply building a better life, one you can be proud of, one that is authentically your own. Elena and I sat in comfortable silence as the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The air was cool, the wine was good, and for the first time in a very long time, my future felt like an open road instead of a dead end. I thought back to Sarah's whispered curse in the conference room, her final, pathetic attempt to chain me to her memory. You'll never be happy without me. I looked at the home I was rebuilding with my own 2 hands, at the intelligent, funny woman sitting across from me, a friend who had helped me navigate the darkest days and was now sharing a peaceful sunset with me. I took a sip of wine and smiled. I never needed her to be happy anyway.